Hey, aloha, and welcome to Stan Energy Man. Here's Stan Osserman coming to you live and direct from Kailua, Hawaii. And I've declared, at least in my neighborhood, Casual Tuesday. So I'm wearing my what we call in Hawaii puka t-shirt, which is my oldest t-shirt with the most holes in it, but you can't see any of the holes, so I figured it'd be okay. Anyway, Mr. Fidel might call me up later and tell me I have to redo my show, but we'll go with it because it's hot and I wanted to wear something comfortable. But today's show is a little bit more informative, I would say, on the technical side than usual. But it's certainly not intended to be a how-to manual for how to put solar on your house. But it is a advisory on maybe some things you ought to consider when you're going to put solar on your house, and some of the things you need to know to make sure that whoever you're working with, the solar installers and the company you're working with, is giving you what you need, or giving you too much and costing you too much, or not giving you enough and not giving you some of the capability you need, and maybe even putting you in a box where to add and get to where you need to be is going to be more expensive than if they just done it right in the first place. So this show is a little bit more on the what to expect and the right questions to ask, and maybe even some of the ways of thinking about how you want to put solar on your house. I'd like to start off with a short story to kind of get the point across that most people, I would call them energy ignorant, but Mr. Professor Nate Hagen is one of my guests. He prefers to use the term energy blind, which I think is a much more acceptable term than energy ignorance, which probably sounds kind of condescending. But most people don't really understand how much energy they use. And I run into this time and time again. I've taken hydrogen fuel cell generators out to the field to support an event, and I go over to the guy running the sound system and I go, about how much power do you need? He goes, what do you mean? And I go, you know, how many how many amps does all your equipment draw? And is it all 110? Do you have any 220 volt? It's like they don't know. And then when you put that together with the lighting guys and the guys cooking and maybe some fans and other stuff and other audio visual stuff like projector or computers that the announcer MC is using at his station, you know, nobody really thinks much about the energy and how much they're using. And I'd say that if you ask anybody how much their electric bill is every month, they could probably tell you pretty quickly within 10 bucks what their bill runs every month. But if you ask them how many kilowatt hours a month they use, they'd probably give you the deer in the headlights look. So a long time ago, I had a friend who came up to me because he knew I did energy stuff, and he said, "Hey, Stan, get this brilliant idea. We ought to take all the golf carts and put a solar panel on the roof, and then we wouldn't need batteries or anything. We could just drive around with the solar panel on the roof." And I went, probably not going to work. And he's like, "What do you mean? You can put solar panels in your house and run your whole house. You should be able to put a solar panel on a go-kart, a golf cart, and be able to." And I said, "Well, not really, because transportation energy is a lot more energy intensive than most people think." So, for example, maybe something in the range of a 50 horsepower motor, or if you went to a golf cart, maybe a 25 horsepower motor is probably a 20 kilowatt motor. Well, that's 20,000 watts of power just to drive that little golf cart around. Well, my house uses 20,000 kilowatt hours a day. So it's like that one golf cart probably uses as much power as my entire house. Um, and it's out there in a couple hours going up and down hills with a fairly powerful motor to it. So I have a little diagram. I call it a power triangle, and we'll throw it up there and I'll talk to it a little bit. But this is actually one of the diagrams that they use um, in training military electronics people. in what's called Ohm's law, or part of Ohm's law, where you deal with a couple of variables. And the way the triangle works is the three corners. If you cover up one corner, there's a way it's set up to give you the formula pretty logically. So for example, in your house, you mostly deal with just 110 or 220 volt electricity. It comes in your house as 220. It gets split at your circuit breaker panel to 220 and 110 and goes throughout your house. And that's to run your lights and your appliances and everything. And your big appliances use the 220, and the big appliances would be your oven and range, or your water heater if you have an electric water heater, or your electric dryer if you have an electric dryer. Those are your big power draws. And they're all, those are all 220 volt. And the rest of all your circuits, whether it's lights or outlets, are all 110 volt, or it can go all the way up to 115 volts for the outlets and up to 240 volts for the heavy appliances. But they're all part of a formula. So the way they measure power on your electric bill is kilowatt hours. So on the top, you see power and you see watts. Well, a kilowatt is 1,000 watts. So if you want to get an idea of how much power you need, you already know the voltage because most of your appliances are 110, your coffee maker, your microwave. And if you want to find out the amps, that, in other words, you already know the voltage, it's set at 110, 115, but each appliance draws more or less power than others, and it's actually on the appliance. If you look at the little plate that comes on there, the little silver plate that talks about the specifications and Underwriters Laboratory approved, you'll see amps. And most lights are, fairly low amperage, 4 or 5 amps, 10 amps maybe. And some of your other appliances, maybe 8, 10 amps. Most of your circuits in your house are 20 amp or 15 amp. Most of the time it's lights are 15 amps and the rest of your outlets are 20 amps. And the reason that's important is that tells you what size wires have to run to support those amperages for that voltage. So the way this triangle works is if you want to know how much power something's going to draw, you cover up that triangle, the top of the triangle where it says power, and the two things left are next to each other. So that means you multiply them. So if you want to know power, you just take volts times amps and it gives you power. But if you don't know the amps, but you know the volts and you know the power it's drawing, you cover up the amp side and it's power divided by volts, or power over volts, which is how it shows up on the triangle. Or if you want to know the volts, you cover up the left side of the triangle and it's power over amps gives you volts. So that's just a little trick that they use in electronics school to teach you part of Ohm's laws that show you the relationship between power, voltage, and current. And so and amps are the current. So if you looked at the real triangle, it has a P, a V, and an I believe, for amps. So anyway, as we get into looking at your house and figure out what you need for your house, one of the first things you want to do, and we don't need to triangle up anymore, one of the first things you want to do is go for efficiencies. You always want to try and make your house as efficient as possible before you design your electric system that you're going to build, because you want to make sure that you're not wasting electricity or not wasting your time buying a whole lot more PV and then throwing the electricity away. A habit a lot of people have is when they've got PV on the roof, they figure they got free electricity and then they start leaving lights on and everything else. But you always got to think efficiency. So think efficiency first, and maybe even think about the way you set up your whole house. For example, the use of, and I'll get into this near the end of the show, but the use of DC electricity, in other words, direct current electricity, is what your solar panels make, as opposed to AC electricity, which is what comes out of your outlets, is you can get DC powered lighting that's also LED, light emitting diodes, which are extremely efficient and extremely good on energy usage. And you can install those in your house. I don't personally know too many people that have DC LED lights in their house, but I'm gonna have them in my house when I change the electrics out. But you can get 48-volt DC electric LED lights that are really bright, last forever, and don't take much energy, and they're also safer because they don't take as much energy. The wires don't overheat as easily and things like that. Another thing you can think of is, your big appliances, your oven, like I mentioned, oven, water heater, and your electric dryer. Um, you can do things like right now in Hawaii, if you build a new house, you're required to put a solar water heater in the system and use solar panels to augment your electricity. But the solar water heater is actually a requirement now in code, if I'm not mistaken. And that actually saves you some money, especially if you use a lot of hot water, because you'd be amazed, I mean, absolutely astounded how hot that roof of yours gets all year round, winter or summer. Even if you're in a cooler place like up in Waimea on the Big Island, it'll actually generate quite a bit of heat if it's designed right and give you quite a bit of hot water without any electric cost, because a solar water heater on your roof doesn't even use solar electricity to heat the water anyway. It uses sometimes to move it down to the water heater in a little pump, but that's not much. But the solar water heater actually just uses the radiation heat from the sun directly to heat water inside tubes or to heat some medium like an antifreeze or something inside the tubes, which then circulates through a heat exchanger and heats your water up. The bottom line is it just is a really efficient way to heat water rather than burning electricity or natural gas to make the hot water. But another thing you can do is, and a lot of people prefer gas cooking, use gas to do your stove and maybe your clothes dryer. So dry your clothes on the line, and maybe for the last 10 or 15 minutes, throw them in the gas dryer, and you'll save a lot of energy and a lot of electricity in that respect as well. Um, Something I wanted to get into near the end of the show, but I'll mention now. As you all know, if you listen to my show much, I'm into hydrogen. I really like hydrogen. And we're getting to the point where a lot of the appliances that not run off propane and natural gas right now, at some point will probably be available in hydrogen. And if you're already making electricity and if you decide to store some of your electricity in hydrogen, you could then use it for cooking or heating your water or drying your clothes. And that's nice because in an emergency, even propane is going to be hard to get a lot of the times because it needs to be shipped in. It's brought in from outside, natural gas. But you could be making your own gas to cook with if you're storing hydrogen. So that's a little bit about on the efficiency side. The last thing I want to talk about on efficiency is, is it real practical for you to have solar? If you live in an apartment building or if you live in a condominium, you don't own the roof most likely. The landlord does, or the owner of the building does. And I doubt that he's going to let you hog the whole roof to put a bunch of solar on. So, about how many square feet do you need um, to generate electricity for your house? And the number I came up with is about 70 square feet per 1,000 watts or per kilowatt. And so this image right here is a good, I call it rules of thumb for solar. So the first thing up on the top is a good site for learning how to estimate some of your things before you go and talk to a solar installer. The second one is a solar panel efficiency. Most people, they don't know how efficient the panels are, but solar panels range between 15 and 50% efficiency. But don't be deceived. Most of them that you're going to see are only 15 to 20% efficient. And the reason I caution you there is that The multi-junction panels or the focusing panels that are actually really efficient, like 26 to 50%, um, are usually very efficient only when they're tracking the sun. So in other words, you can't just nail them on your roof and have them face south and boom, you're going to get power. If they're not if they're not focused directly at the sun, sometimes their efficiency drops off to like 3 to 5%, which is really, really poor. So if somebody comes and tries to sell you like panels that are 50 to 60 or 20 to 25 to 50% efficient, these are the best things, and they're just gonna put them in racks on your roof. Probably not a good idea because if they're not tracking, they're probably not getting all that efficiency. Average cost per kilowatt installed. In other words, if you needed a 5 kilowatt system, after you did all your math, it'd be about 10,000 bucks, or 2,000 times five is what you should kind of expect as a ballpark figure for installation. And like I said, it's 70 square feet for 1 kilowatt of electricity. And that's pretty reasonable for most people have over 1,000 square feet of roof space on a single family home. But again, if you're in an apartment or something, please don't think you can install a bunch of panels on your lanai and get a good photovoltaic system. You might be able to do a small backup system for yourself so you don't have to run a generator. But unless you're a single family home owner or have access to installing on a roof or next to your residence, it's kind of tough to get off the grid. And the last note I have there is a typical per kilowatt hour cost is about 5 cents a kilowatt hour from your PV system. And that's over time, over the lifespan of the system. Now, considering that here in Honolulu, we're paying anywhere from 25 to 35 or so cents a kilowatt hour, depending on where you live. 5 cents a kilowatt hour is a pretty good price. So we're going to take a quick break right now. And when we come back, I'll get into more specifics on calculating what you need to look at on your house to talk to the solar installer guys and get the right size system.
Aloha, I'm Krista Stadler, the host of Nonprofits Mean Business 2 on ThinkTech Hawaii. Nonprofits Mean Business 2 investigates the operational challenges and costs related to managing nonprofit organizations, while encouraging our viewers to find a nonprofit organization that you're passionate about in our community. We are streamed live on ThinkTech Hawaii bi-weekly at 12 p.m. on Thursdays. Thank you so much for watching our show. We look forward to seeing you then. Mahalo.
Hey, welcome back to Stan Energy Man. We're talking solar panels on your roof and how to kind of get a good wag for what you really need. So we talked a little bit about some of the rules of thumb and how to figure out, how much things should cost in general. And I put them on the screen that way so that when you go to YouTube, you can actually bring the show back up on YouTube and look right at them and copy them down if you missed them the first time. But once you get to actually calculating what you need for your particular location, there's a couple key variables in play. One of them is how much energy you average every day. So, for example, if you look at your electric bill, And you look, and Hawaiian Electric has a really good electric bill for checking your efficiency and stuff. You should be able to see on there how many kilowatt hours per day your house uses. I know that my house uses between 19 and 21 kilowatt hours a day, as long as it's just my wife and I here. And that's with an electric dryer, an electric water heater, an electric range and oven. So we could be much more efficient on the electrical side, but we don't have air conditioning, and we don't run a lot of lights and stuff. We do run our fans quite a bit because it does get warm here. Um, but that's the first thing you look at is the overall energy that you use on an average day. The other key important piece to figuring out what your system has to carry is the peak load. And that's where that little triangle comes into play. If you take your big energy hogs, your range and your dishwasher and your dryer and hot water heater and stuff, and you took your worst case scenario, like, I mean, try and be as realistic as possible. You come home from work and you're cooking on the stove and you're deciding to do laundry and running the dryer and got the TV on and a whole bunch of other appliances and computer and everything. Do a little math and see about how many watts of power you're drawing at any one time. And that's your peak. And if you don't get that number right, even if you do a good system, you'll have these times where you'll be humming along and all of a sudden one of your appliances like your electric dryer will kick in, or an air conditioner will kick on, and you'll actually see your lights start to brown down a little bit and come back. That's because you didn't calculate your peak requirements quite to where you need to. And so your peak requirements are important to figure out how big your inverter needs to be, and just overall how much power production you need, and your battery sizes and things like that. So I'm going to put up another slide. And this one is really more the whole system. And we can make that one go on the whole screen if that's okay. So this is really a simplified diagram of an off the grid, that's key, off the grid solar installation. And although not a whole lot of people go off the grid right now, I can tell you that as Hawaiian Electric has to deal more and more with intermittent renewables, they're giving out less and less interconnect permits. And that's actually in some areas, you can't get an interconnect permit because the grid is already saturated with solar or wind. And so this model is what you would build to if you were just going to be totally disconnected from the grid. So on the upper left-hand side there, you have your photovoltaic array on the roof. And that one you determine by saying, okay, if I have like I'll use my house for example, 20 kilowatt hours of average power use per day, I get about 5.5 hours of rated power from my solar voltaic system on any given day. In other words, if I had 5 kilowatts on my roof, I'd get 5 times 5.5 hours of generation. In other words, that would be like probably 27 kilowatt hours of power off of my roof. So if I'm only averaging 20 to 21 kilowatt hours per day, but I'm generating 25 to 27 kilowatts, I probably have a little too much, but it's okay to have a little bit extra and make sure you're covered. But just calculate it in that ballpark, 10% or so over, not a big deal. To the right of the photovoltaics, you see a cutoff switch. That's really important because just like your water system, you wouldn't just want to have one valve at the street to turn off all your water when you wanted to just change a valve on the sink or your faucet or something. So you should have cutoff switches at critical places, and I put a couple of them here on the chart because you want to be able to isolate your photovoltaics and stop them if you want to work on the rest of the system, because it is producing electricity and you can get a good shock if you don't have your system off when you're working on the rest of the system. So to the right of the cutoff switch on the top there is your DC charge controller. That takes the solar DC current that comes in off the roof, and all the blue lines are DC current. So you follow the blue lines, that's DC current. And the charge controller looks at the batteries, assesses how full they are or not full they are, and they direct the power into the batteries. And when they start to get near the top, they cut them off so that you're not overcharging the batteries and putting undue stress on them. Then that big bank on the vertical side with the pluses and minuses, that's your battery bank. And I would say that as long as your battery bank is big enough to cover, I'll use a rough figure, half of your average daily load. So mine would be a 10 kilowatt hour battery because I use 20 kilowatt hours a day. If 10 kilowatt hours, it probably gives me enough to carry my nighttime loads and also have a little bit extra buffer there for days when it's a little cloudy and the solar's not really producing the way it should. Then I have a line going off in the middle there that goes to another controller or circuit breaker panel, which controls those DC lights I was talking to you about. Instead of converting your power all to AC power or alternating current, you can take that direct current right from the batteries and run a lot of your lights in your house. And that can actually give you some really good lighting with a long longevity and really low on the power consumption. Then you go to the bottom left-hand side there and you see that pentagon shape. Um, that's where you have your DC to AC converter. You notice it's a blue arrow going in. That's because it's got DC power going into it. And then it's got an orange line coming out, which is the AC power coming out and going to your circuit breaker panel to deliver all the power to your appliances, your big appliances, and your small appliances. And there's that another cutoff switch. Now, the last thing on that image is on the right-hand side, and I just want to talk a little bit about it, the kind of yellow lightning bolt. That's an extra generator. And if you think about it, if you go with that gas appliance option, like I mentioned earlier, with your gas water heater, gas oven, and gas clothes dryer, then you could also put a generator in the mix and take that generator and send the electricity right to your AC system if you wire your house properly, or you can actually send AC power to another charge controller, one that's meant to take AC power and charge your batteries up. So the stuff on the right-hand side, that lightning bolt looking thing, the generator, that's actually more than you generally see in a typical solar off-the-grid system. But I'd say it's probably worth having because you can get generators in gasoline, diesel, or natural gas. So if you're already using natural gas for cooking and you have a natural gas generator, then as long as you have a big tank of propane sitting outside in your, outside your carport or something, not only do you have cooking and everything available when other people don't, but you could charge your batteries if the solar panels, if like you're having a really rainy week or something, and the solar panels just aren't keeping up, you could still charge your batteries. And then if you want to use that generator to run your AC power, you could take it and just maybe shut off a bunch of your circuits and just have that AC power go to your refrigerator and maybe one of your rooms to deliver AC power to run a TV or charge your phones or things like that. So this is where you can get a little creative. So first of all, to recap, I'd like to say that you can take a good analysis of your house, your peak load requirements, and also your average load that you get off your electric bill, and get a good idea of how much you use a day. And that helps you size your batteries and your inverter and how many panels you need. Next thing is, and the solar guys will tell you, in Hawaii, you may need more solar panels than you think, depending on where you're at. If you're bucked up against the mountains and you don't get a lot of the early sun or late sun, you might need more solar panels. So if you're deep in Manoa Valley or in Kahaluu, you may need more solar panels than you think. Um, and if you don't have any big roof that faces south, um, you may need to actually have some more solar panels. Like in my house, it's L-shaped. I'd probably put some on the east side and some on the south side to get, because I get a lot of morning and early afternoon and afternoon sun, and then the coat allows block off my late afternoon sun, so I might split my panels between the two roofs. But generally speaking, in Hawaii, your best bet is a southern exposure for your solar, and you should opt for that unless you've got mountains or trees or something blocking it. So that gives you a good idea in 30 minutes of what to be looking for when you talk to your solar guy. The model that I showed you, and you can go back and look at it on YouTube, is really a good basic model to kind of make the batteries the hub of your system and make them the kind of stabilizing factor to take care of your house and use them for recharging and use that generator to recharge it. It's a really good model. I've seen it used several times, and people are really happy with it. The last thing I'd like to say is just remember you're dealing with electricity, and just because it's DC power coming off the roof doesn't mean it's can't hurt you. It can. So don't just cowboy stuff on your own. Work with a professional, but work smart and work safe. Next week, Stan Energy Man is going to be on a little bit early. We're going to be on at 9 in the morning. And that's because we have a really special guest, the CEO of a company called Plug Power, one of the largest producers of hydrogen fuel cell systems in the world, is going to be on, and we're going to interview him. He's also a charter member of the Hydrogen Council, which is an international council promoting hydrogen energy storage and energy technology. So we'll see you next week a little bit early on Stan the Energy Man. Till then, aloha.